In this video, we're going to go over exercise red flags. So what do I mean by red flags in an exercise? Well, these are basically just things that, at a very general principle-based level, if they are present, in the context of a specific exercise and maybe not in the context of the others that you're doing, are things to look out for. So if all of the exercises that you're doing are sort of falling underneath of this category, right, there may be other things that are sort of influencing your ability to make progress in the gym. But these are just some of the things that I think are more obvious in terms of, red flags in their presentation. So without further ado, let's get into them. So the first one that I sort of thought of is just, if an exercise can only be done with higher reps, right? So if someone says, okay, I'm doing this exercise and it's really just an exercise for, toning, or if it's really just an exercise for more of like a squeeze sensation type thing that can only really be done with super, super light weights relative to what that person is capable of lifting. And then in addition to that, and sort of as a consequence of that, with really, really high reps, again, 15, 20, 30, 40 reps even, that's probably a red flag, right? And so the reason that that's a red flag is because if you are incapable of, let's say, scaling an exercise beyond 15, 20, 30 reps and, down into the sort of 10 to 12 rep range, or maybe even the 6 to 10 rep range, it's highly likely that that exercise is unstable in some way. So what that means, for example, is that you may be attempting to create high amounts of output, but for whatever reason, your nervous system is essentially down regulating your ability to produce force. Again, in the context of, let's say, like a squat, imagine, and this is maybe an extreme example, imagine you were trying to squat on a Bosu ball, or you were trying to squat on top of a surface that was slippery, right? You would have a very, very difficult time loading that exercise with any degree of higher load relative to your strength as compared to, an exercise that was super stable and super locked in. And again, as a consequence, what might end up being much easier to progress, right? And that'll be a sort of another red flag in just a minute here. But I think overall, this is the one I see most commonly, which is just this description that an exercise can only be done with lighter weights, or this exercise is for toning. Right? I think that's a major red flag, right? And it indicates a problem with the actual physics of the motion rather than the specific muscle that you're trying to train. So another one is it's very difficult to learn. So exercise is by no means, simple. So in other words, there are certain exercises that are more complicated than others, but think about like one of the ones that's maybe more simple, at least in theory, like a leg extension. No one really gets down on a leg extension and doesn't really know what to do. Even the person that is a total newbie who has never lifted before, or maybe who was just starting up with a trainer, can make progress really, really fast on a leg extension. Why? Well, because it's very stable. There's only really one thing that you can do on it, which doesn't necessarily make it better than other options, right? It's just more specific for a particular goal. But if its exercise is very, very difficult to learn, meaning that it takes, more than just a couple weeks to get really, really good and proficient at it, that's also likely another red flag. And a lot of the times it comes hand in hand with this first one of only being able to do higher reps and using lighter weights. In addition, any exercise that is incredibly difficult to progress, and you're kind of noticing a theme, right, that all these three so far are sort of related. Any exercise that you can't sort of add weight to over time, or at least can't become more technically proficient in, likely has some sort of flaw or some sort of mismatch between the physics and what your intent is with that particular exercise. So a really common example with this particular one, the first one that comes to mind, is any sort of single arm press, right? Whether it be with a cable or a dumbbell or a machine. A lot of times people end up having a lot of difficulty progressing. And of course, there are other reasons for lacking progression or lacking the ability to progress. But a lot of times it relates to, again, this instability factor of the exercise, where you can only create so much output as a consequence, again, of the instability that is inherent in that exercise. And to use this particular example, and maybe how you would alter it or fix it, is maybe you would rather be doing, or you should rather be doing something that's like a bilateral press, right? A press with two arms at the same time, right? So that you're not so unstable and moving all over the place. Or if you are going to do a single arm press, let's say like with a cable and you're pressing with your left arm, you want to hold on to something with the right arm to make sure that the limiter of the motion is, we'll say, the specific portion of the pec that you're aiming to train. So something being very difficult to learn and progress, and also using super light weights or needing to use super light weights to do it. Again, all sort of different ways, addressing different aspects of a similar problem. And I think that, any one of these three things tends to crop up in a situation, again, where an exercise isn't really well suited from a physics standpoint, or just from like a specific load direction standpoint, like the load is going in a different direction, or there's a weird resistance profile, relative to maybe what makes sense for that muscle group, etc. In addition, and the next one that I put here is that certain exercises, and just to pick on a single one, that the first one that comes to mind, like a barbell bench press. A lot of people will have some kind of pain doing a barbell bench press, whether it be in their elbow or in their shoulder or maybe both. And what people do as a consequence of this, or really to sort of eliminate that bad sensation, is they will do other exercises that actually feel good beforehand. So this is a common one where, again, people will maybe do a barbell press or something similar. And before then, they'll say something like, I need to do pec flies, or I need to do triceps extensions to get these joints nice and warm. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a warm-up. I think warm-ups are incredibly useful and valuable and necessary in a lot of cases. But if you need other exercises to be able to feel good doing, what you consider your primary exercise for the day, that's another red flag, right? Because what that indicates is that you are incapable of warming up with that exercise, which by definition essentially means that there's something, that's either misaligned about it, or maybe you're trying to use too much load as a consequence of whatever reason. And so that's another red flag, is just this necessity to utilize other exercises to get warm on a particular motion, right? So again, in this case of a bench press, a lot of people just aren't particularly well built to exercise within the constraints of a fixed motion like a bench press. A lot of people don't like to hear that because we've been indoctrinated into believing that the bench press is the king of all upper body exercises. But when we just break these things down and look at every exercise as just a combination of resistance and our anatomy and the interaction between the two, we start to sort of dispel the mystical, magical sort of aura around specific motions. So this is a really big one, and I think this is a really common one, specifically like in the more popular fitness space, where people will be doing like 1,000 different kinds of warm-ups that include everything but the actual motion. So again, another way to say this is, if you can't warm up appropriately and feel good doing a warm up with a single motion, probably a red flag for that motion in terms of how it's interacting with you individually. And then the last one I put here, and this is something that has, I think, been perpetuated as a consequence of just short form social media, is anytime that anyone claims that an exercise is the best without any context around what the aim of the exercise is, and what the goal of the particular exercise is, and who it's for and what it's trying to accomplish, I think that's another red flag, because usually when people communicate that an exercise is the best, they communicate it with a very certain tone, as if it's going to be the same for everyone, as if everyone's going to have the same outcome. And so whenever, this is more so one where when you hear it come from someone else, I would sort of take a pause and just be cautious about whether or not you sort of buy into that narrative. And again, all these things are sort of related, all sort of, again, coming from different angles, saying similar things here. But if anyone claims any exercise to be the best, you should be highly cautious of that, and you should start to ask more specific questions like, well, what is it the best for, and who is it the best for, right? And in what instances might it not be as good for accomplishing the particular goal? All those kinds of questions, those more specific lines of questioning, are much more helpful, both in terms of just our general ability as an industry to, give people better exercise experiences, but for also you specifically, like, try not to get too tied up in thinking that any one thing is the best, because a lot of people, again, in the example of the bench press, will just repeatedly be doing it because they think that they have to do it, right? So again, this line of communication that says that you have to do anything, I would really bring a lot of caution to that. And then one more that I didn't have listed here is really sensation based. And so sensation is a very tricky conversation to have, because some sensations that we have in the gym are sensations that we desire, right? For example, if I do a set of 10 on a particular exercise, maybe a chest press or something like that, if I get to that 9th, 10th rep and my chest is burning, we call that good. But if, we say, there's a slightly different kind of sensation and there's maybe a pinching in my chest, we call that bad. And so just any exercise, and this was maybe more obvious, which is why I didn't list it, that doesn't feel like the right kind of good, right? That sort of feels like there's something slightly off about this, whether it be in the tissue or around the joint or around a joint that is not the primary mover, of the exercise. you want to sort of bring caution to those exercises as well. So I think as long as you sort of check all these boxes, you're able to warm up with the exercise, you're able to load it substantially over time, you're able to learn it and progress it easily, you've probably got a pretty good exercise for whatever goal that you're trying to accomplish. So keep these red flags in mind, and keep them in mind, especially as time goes on, because a lot of times what you'll find is week 1 of an exercise feels awesome regardless of what you do, and then week 4, week 5, week 6, when you really start to get deeper into the weeds of progression, these kinds of issues start to crop up. So pay attention as you go, and not just sort of when you begin the exercise, and I think you'll be in a pretty good position to have a really, really solid arsenal of exercises. If you like this video and you want to learn more from me, please consider enrolling in my online anatomy and biomechanics course. The course contains over 15 hours specifically dedicated to improving your understanding of anatomy and physics and how it applies to lifting weights. Over 3,000 students have enrolled in this course and have reported back that it's the most easy to digest material that doesn't include any sort of boring textbook lecture that you might normally find in a typical college curriculum. So if you want to improve your ability to lift and as a consequence grow muscle more easily and reduce your pain in the gym, check out the link in the description.